When she first moved in, I thought I was doing something kind. That was the thought that carried me through the first few weeks, that kindness, no matter how inconvenient, was always the right thing. But I didn't know yet that kindness can sometimes open the wrong door, and let the wrong person walk right in. It started on a damp Sunday evening, the kind of day where the clouds hung low enough to touch the treetops. I was at the stove stirring a pot of chicken soup, the same recipe my mother used when my son was little, when my husband, Mark, cleared his throat behind me. "Mom wants to talk to you," he said, and something in his voice made me set down the ladle. I turned. "About what?" "She has a favor. Just hear her out, okay?" His mother, Ruth, lived 2 streets over. She was sharp-tongued but well-meaning, the kind of woman who believed control equaled care. When she called later that night, her voice was sugary sweet, always a bad sign. "Laura, sweetheart, I'm sure Mark already told you a little. My friend Patricia is having a rough time. Her husband passed unexpectedly, and she's being forced out of her apartment. I told her, without even thinking, that she could stay with you too until she gets back on her feet." I blinked at the phone. "Stay with us? For how long?" "Oh, not long at all," Ruth chirped. "A few weeks. She's practically family. She used to teach with Mark back in his high school days. You'll like her. She's quiet, tidy, helpful in the kitchen." That last part was meant to flatter me, I think. Ruth knew how much pride I took in keeping our home steady, warm, ours. Still, I hesitated. "I just don't want." "Sweetheart," she interrupted, voice softening. "You've always had such a generous heart. It's only temporary." When I hung up, Mark looked at me hopefully. It'd really help Mom out. And because I loved him, because I wanted to be the kind woman everyone thought I was, I said yes. Patricia arrived 3 days later with 2 suitcases and an air of polite fragility. She was maybe 52, a few years older than me, with shoulder-length auburn hair that gleamed even in our hallway's poor lighting. Her perfume, something floral and sharp, lingered long after she passed. "Oh, Laura," she said, clasping both my hands, "I can't thank you enough. You have such a beautiful home." I smiled, flustered. "It's nothing fancy." But she walked through the foyer like she was inspecting a stage she'd soon perform on. She touched the mantel, straightened a picture frame, hummed approval. That first evening, I made lasagna. Patricia offered to help, but I insisted she rest. Still, she hovered near the stove, chatting with Mark about old school memories, names and faces I didn't recognize. I listened as they laughed, a light nostalgic laughter that made me feel, for the first time, like an outsider in my own kitchen. At dinner, she sat between us, her chair angled toward Mark. She told a story about how he once organized a prank during a teacher training day, and he threw his head back laughing, eyes crinkling in a way I hadn't seen in months. When she finished, she touched his wrist, quick, casual. Maybe nothing. But I saw it. After she went upstairs to settle into the guest room, Mark leaned over and kissed my cheek. "She's harmless, you know." "I know," I said, smiling because I was supposed to. But as I cleared the dishes, I noticed her glass still half full, her napkin neatly folded on the plate, perfectly centered, as if she'd set a place for herself she didn't plan to leave. The first week passed in cautious politeness. Patricia insisted on contributing. She bought groceries, folded laundry, and woke early to make coffee. She had a habit of humming softly to herself, the same tune over and over, until it got into my head like static. "You don't have to do that," I told her one morning as she wiped the counters. "Nonsense," she said, smiling. "I like feeling useful." She baked a peach cobbler that made Mark sigh with pleasure. "It tastes like the one my grandma used to make." Patricia laughed. "She taught me that recipe, remember?" And then, with a wink, "You always were her favorite." It was small, almost teasing, but it stung. I hadn't known his grandmother. She'd died before we married. Somehow Patricia's claim folded her deeper into Mark's history, into a part of him I could never touch. At night, when I came to bed, Mark was already half asleep. You don't mind, do you? He mumbled once. She's really helping around the house. No, of course not, I whispered. But I did mind. I minded the way he said she's helping, as if I'd been falling short. By the second week, things shifted subtly. I returned from work one afternoon to find the living room rearranged. The sofa had been angled toward the window, the rug rolled differently, and the painting above the mantel, the one I'd chosen on our 10th anniversary, replaced by a still life of lilies I'd never seen before. Patricia thought the lighting made more sense this way, Mark said when I asked. Patricia? I echoed. She's got a great eye for design. Don't you think it opens the room up? Maybe it did. Maybe that was the problem, the room felt too open, as if there were no longer walls to protect me. That evening at dinner, she wore one of my aprons. I hope you don't mind, she said, but I found it while cooking. You don't use it much. I wanted to protest, to remind her she was a guest, not the host. But Mark looked so content spooning the stew she'd made that I said nothing. On Friday, Ruth joined us for dinner. The table gleamed under the chandelier, the good china laid out not by me, but by Patricia. She'd even polished the silver. When Ruth arrived, she hugged Patricia first. Oh, my dear, this looks wonderful. Then she turned to me. Laura, isn't it lovely to have a bit of help around here? You've been so busy lately. I opened my mouth, but Patricia jumped in. Laura's been incredible. She even let me take over the kitchen tonight. Mark grinned. We might keep you forever. Everyone laughed except me. After dinner, I stood at the sink while they chatted in the living room. Their voices floated in warm waves, Ruth's proud tone, Patricia's gentle laughter, Mark's deep responses. I scrubbed a plate too hard and heard it crack. I didn't say anything. I just dropped the broken piece quietly into the trash. That night, as I passed the dining room, I noticed something odd. Patricia had left a notebook on the table open, neat handwriting filling every line. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity pulled me. At the top, weekly budget. Below, groceries, $120. Utilities, $85. Mortgage, $1,200. I frowned. Mortgage? Why was she noting that? I closed the book and stepped back, my pulse quickening. It could have been innocent, maybe she was tracking her expenses, maybe she liked order. But a sliver of unease lodged in me that I couldn't shake. Sunday afternoon, Ruth invited us for lunch. Patricia came too, carrying her peach cobbler like an offering. During the meal, Ruth praised her endlessly, her compassion, her cooking, her stabilizing influence. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You must feel so lucky to have another woman in the house, Laura. Someone who understands what keeps a home running." The comment hit like a slap, though she smiled as she said it. I smiled back, the kind of tight smile women use when we've been cornered. On the drive home, Mark was quiet. Finally, he said, "You know, Mom's right in some ways. Patricia's made things easier. You've seemed tired." "I'm not tired," I said. "Just crowded." He sighed, hand drumming the steering wheel. "She's family, Laura. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked out the window, watching the houses blur. "She's not family," I whispered. "She's a guest." But even as I said it, I realized I didn't believe it anymore. The following week, my friend Marianne came over for coffee. The moment she stepped inside, she raised an eyebrow. "Who redecorated? It looks like a magazine." "Patricia," I said flatly. "Patricia. My mother-in-law's friend." Marianne whistled. "Wow. She's thorough." We sat on the patio, and as I poured coffee, Patricia appeared, wearing one of my cardigans. "Would anyone like lemon bars?" she asked sweetly. Marianne looked at me, then at her. "Sure." After she left, Marianne said softly, "She's marking territory." I laughed uneasily. "It's not like that." But when I looked through the window, Patricia was clearing the coffee cups before I'd even finished mine. The next small crack came when she began answering the phone. Hello. Oh hi, yes, this is the Lewis residence, she'd chirp. Mark's not home right now, can I take a message? Once, it was my sister calling. Later she told me Patricia had spoken as if she were me. I confronted her gently that evening. Please don't answer the phone when it's for me. She smiled, unbothered. Of course, dear. Old habits. I used to handle the calls at the school, remember? I didn't remember, because I hadn't been there. That night I told Mark. She's crossing lines. He rubbed his temples. You're reading too much into it. She's just being helpful. Helpful. That word again. It echoed in my head as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. Helpful was supposed to make life easier. So why did everything suddenly feel heavier? 2 days later, I came home early. From the driveway, I heard laughter, Mark's low chuckle, Patricia's lighter one. Through the window, I saw them sitting at the dining table, a bottle of wine between them. My chair was empty. When I stepped inside, they looked up, startled. Oh, Laura, we didn't expect you yet, Patricia said, cheeks flushed. We were just talking about old times. I glanced at the table, 3 glasses, only 2 used. Enjoying yourselves? Mark smiled too quickly. Patricia opened a bottle from the cellar. Want a glass? No, thanks, I said, and went upstairs. Later, when I came back down, the bottle was empty, and Patricia's lipstick stained Mark's glass. He was asleep on the couch. She'd left a note on the counter, dinner's in the oven. Get some rest. It wasn't the words that bothered me. It was that she'd written them on my stationery, the one I used for holiday letters and thank you notes. The breaking point began, as these things often do, with paperwork. A week later, Mark came home with a thick envelope. We need to sign a few refinance documents, he said casually. Just adjusting the mortgage rate, Patricia's helping with some of the legal stuff. What legal stuff? I asked. She used to handle admin for the district, he said. She knows the paperwork. She even offered to co-sign so we could get a better rate. I froze. Co-sign? Why would she co-sign? She's staying here, contributing. It's just on paper. On paper? I repeated. My voice sounded foreign. He sighed. It's no big deal, Laura. It's just temporary until the refinance clears. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being rewritten, and not just the mortgage. That night, I went to the kitchen and found Patricia pouring herself tea. She looked at me with mild surprise. Up late. I couldn't sleep. She stirred sugar into her cup, slow and deliberate. Change always keeps us up. But it's good, isn't it? A fresh start. I didn't answer. She smiled faintly and walked past me, the scent of her perfume trailing behind roses and smoke. When she was gone, I opened the cabinet for a mug and realized she'd moved everything again. My favorite cup, the one with the chipped handle from our honeymoon, was gone. I found it later in the trash, broken clean in half. The morning after I found my mug in the trash, I stood in the kitchen pretending to read the newspaper. Patricia breezed in wearing one of Mark's old flannel shirts, one I hadn't seen in years. It hung loosely on her, sleeves rolled up, her hair gathered into a careless bun that somehow looked deliberate. Oh, that shirt, I said lightly, though my stomach tightened. She smiled. Mark said I could have it. It's comfortable. Mark, who was pouring coffee beside her, didn't even look up. Yeah, I never wear it anymore. He was right. He didn't. But it wasn't just a shirt, it was the one he'd worn when he proposed to me at the lake cabin. I remembered the tiny tear near the cuff from where his fishing hook had snagged it. Now that tear rested over her wrist, like a memory she'd borrowed. She poured him coffee, just the way he liked, half sugar, splash of milk, and set it by his elbow before he could reach for it himself. That tiny gesture, his thanks murmured without thought, lodged like a stone in my throat. Later that day, while cleaning the guest room, I found her perfume bottle on the nightstand. Roses and smoke, the same scent that lingered in the hallway. But on the dresser, beside it, was something else, a photo frame. Inside it wasn't her late husband, as I expected, but a picture of my husband's family from years ago. Mark, a younger Ruth, his late father, and Patricia, standing beside them, her hand lightly touching Ruth's shoulder. I'd never seen that photo before. Beneath it was a folded note written in Ruth's familiar handwriting. Patricia, you've always been one of us. I sat down on the edge of the bed, that single sentence echoing in my head. One of us. So this wasn't new, wasn't temporary. She had history roots woven into my husband's family long before I entered the picture. I was the outsider. That evening, when Ruth called, her voice was full of cheer. I hear Patricia's been such a blessing, hasn't she? I hesitated. She's settling in well. She's always had a knack for that, Ruth said. When she stayed with us after college, she practically ran the house. Mark adored her. I froze. He never mentioned that. Oh, he probably forgot. It's been ages. A soft chuckle. You were lucky, I thought of her. She's the kind of woman who knows how to keep a home running smoothly. The implication sat between us unspoken but heavy. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked tired. Her smile lines had deepened into something more like cracks. I turned off the light and watched my faint outline disappear. The next week, I tried to reclaim small spaces. I started cooking again, even though Patricia hovered at my elbow like a helpful shadow. Why don't I chop those onions? She offered. I've got it, I said, sharper than I meant to. She laughed. Of course. You're the chef here. But after dinner, Mark complimented her stew, not mine. She hadn't even made it. By Friday, she'd convinced him to replace our dining chairs for better posture, she said. They arrived sleek and modern, completely mismatched with our old oak table. She rearranged the seating, too. When we sat down to eat, I found myself at the far end, opposite Mark, while Patricia sat between us. It was then I realized what she was doing wasn't accidental. She wasn't blending in. She was reorganizing. And I was being gently, methodically moved out of the frame. I tried to talk to Mark one night, but he was tired, half distracted by his laptop. She's just helping, he said again. Why does everything have to be a fight? Because it feels like she's replacing me. He looked up, incredulous. Replacing you? Laura, come on. That's ridiculous. Is it? She's wearing your shirt, rearranging the house, answering the phone. She's been through a lot, he interrupted. You're acting jealous. The word hit me like a slap. I'm not jealous, I said quietly. I'm uneasy. There's a difference. But he'd already turned back to the glow of the screen. That weekend, Ruth invited us to dinner again. Patricia drove. I sat in the back seat while she and Mark chatted in the front like old friends. Ruth's house smelled of pot roast and nostalgia, walls lined with family photos. As we ate, I noticed the new frame on the sideboard, a recent photo of Mark, Ruth, and Patricia at our housewarming party years ago. My face wasn't in it. I'd been taking the picture. You two always had such chemistry, Ruth said suddenly, smiling at Patricia and Mark. Mark laughed. Mom. I mean it. You finish each other's sentences. Patricia blushed. Oh, Ruth, stop. My fork froze midair. You make it sound like they're a couple. Ruth's eyes flicked to me. Don't be so sensitive, dear. It's just a figure of speech. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. You know she doesn't mean anything by it. But the pity in her eyes burned hotter than any insult. When we got home, I went straight upstairs and shut the bedroom door. Mark followed. You embarrassed my mother. I turned slowly. By existing. By making a scene. I laughed bitterly. She's turning our house into her playground, Mark, and you don't even see it. She's helping. You're the one making it unbearable. The silence that followed was the kind that breaks things. When he left the room, I heard the faint clinking of dishes downstairs, Patricia cleaning up, humming that same tune. I wanted to scream, but instead I sat on the edge of the bed and cried quietly into my hands. Days passed. The house no longer smelled like me, no trace of vanilla candles or lavender detergent. Now it was her perfume, her bread in the oven, her laughter echoing off the walls. Then, one Tuesday morning, something small snapped me awake. The mail. Patricia had taken it upon herself to organize it. As I flipped through the stack, a thick envelope caught my eye. County Records Office. Addressed to Mark Ann. Patricia. My heart dropped. I tore it open. Inside was a document, a notarized form listing joint ownership agreement. Property, our address. Owners, Mark Lewis and Patricia Caldwell. No mention of me. For a moment, the world tilted. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. The words blurred, but that single phrase, joint ownership, burned into my brain. I waited until Mark came home. He walked in smiling, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the envelope. He blinked, genuinely startled. "You opened it. Answer me." He rubbed his neck. "It's temporary." "Temporary?" My voice rose despite me. "You put her name on our house. She co-signed the refinance," he said. "We got a better rate. You didn't tell me. I didn't think you'd understand." I stared at him, speechless. "You didn't think I'd understand that you gave half our home to another woman? It's not half. She's just." "Just what, Mark?" "Safer. Smarter. Easier to live with." His face hardened. "You're twisting this." "No," I said, voice shaking. "I'm seeing it clearly for the first time." That night, Patricia knocked softly on our bedroom door. "Laura, can I come in?" I didn't answer, but she entered anyway, holding 2 cups of tea. "I heard voices," she said gently. "I hate seeing you too upset." I glared at her. "You knew, didn't you?" She hesitated. "Mark mentioned it. You signed those papers. It's just business, dear. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I stepped closer. "You moved into my home, wore my clothes, cooked in my kitchen, and now your name is on my deed. That's personal." She sighed, looking almost sad. "You're a good woman, Laura. But you hold things too tightly. Some homes need new energy." "Then find your own," I whispered. She placed the tea on my nightstand. "You'll thank me one day." Then she left, closing the door softly like a nurse leaving a patient she's already diagnosed. For the next few days, Mark avoided me. Patricia filled the silence, humming, baking, keeping the house immaculate. When friends visited, she entertained them effortlessly, her charm smooth and practiced. One evening, I overheard her telling a neighbor, "We're so lucky it's our little family here." Our. That single word kept me awake that night. By Thursday, I decided I couldn't live in confusion anymore. I went to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with glasses, pulled up the record. "Yes, she said. "It's listed as joint tenancy. Any sale or transfer would require both signatures. Can it be changed back?" "Only if both parties agree." "Both parties?" Meaning Patricia and Mark. Not me. The irony burned, my signature had never been needed to lose what was mine. I walked out into the blinding sunlight, clutching the copy of the document like evidence of a crime no one would believe. That evening, I found Mark in the backyard, trimming the rose bushes. The smell of cut stems filled the air. "I went to the clerk's office," I said quietly. He froze. "You shouldn't have done that." "Shouldn't have?" My voice trembled. "You changed our lives without asking me. It was practical, Laura. We needed the refinance." "Then why her? Why not me?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Because she offered." "You always question everything." The words sliced deeper than he knew. I turned away, blinking back tears. "I question things because they matter to me." He said nothing. When I looked back, Patricia stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching us. There was pity in her eyes again, that same gentle, infuriating pity, and I realized she thought she'd already won. That night, I sat in the dark living room, lit only by the dim glow of the street lamp outside. On the table lay the joint ownership document, the broken mug from weeks ago glued imperfectly together, and my wedding photo, all symbols of something cracked beyond repair. The front door opened. Patricia returned from grocery shopping. She looked surprised to see me awake. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. "No." She smiled faintly. "Homes change, Laura. People change. Don't hold on so hard." I looked at her, my voice calm. "You've mistaken kindness for weakness." Her smile faltered. "I've only ever tried to help." "No," I said. "You've tried to replace." For the first time, something cold flickered behind her eyes, a shadow of the truth she usually hid behind soft tones and tidy gestures. She said nothing more, just walked upstairs, her perfume lingering behind like a warning. I sat there until dawn, listening to the house breathe, the creaks, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rhythm of someone else's footsteps above me. It wasn't mine anymore. Not yet. But it would be again. When the sun finally came up that morning, its light cut through the curtains like thin gold threads, sharp, cold, uninvited. I had barely slept. Every tick of the clock felt like another inch of space slipping away from me. My home, my husband, my place all being rewritten while I stood frozen in the margins. But something shifted in me that dawn. A small, deliberate stillness. I decided I wouldn't be erased quietly. The first thing I did was clear the dining table. Not emotionally, physically. Patricia liked setting it early, hours before dinner, silver polished, napkins folded like swans. That morning I removed everything, folded the linens neatly, and tucked the silverware back into the drawer. When she came downstairs, she froze. "Oh," she said lightly. "Were you planning to redecorate?" "No," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Just wanted a clean slate." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered. "I suppose that's one way to do it." I looked up. "It's my table." That was the first time I saw her mask slip, just for a second. Her lips parted, as if she might argue, but instead she smiled that same practiced smile and left the room. Tiny victories. That's what I told myself. I would reclaim the house one space, one gesture at a time. I started spending more time in the garden. It had always been my sanctuary, roses, hydrangeas, a patch of lavender by the fence. But Patricia had started tending it, pruning the stems too short, rearranging the flower beds. Now, I took back the gloves and tools she'd organized. As I worked, I found something buried under the hydrangeas, a small ceramic plaque that read "Home is where the heart is." It wasn't mine. I left it on her nightstand that evening. A silent message, "You don't belong here." Mark noticed my mood changing but didn't know how to read it. He mistook my calm for acceptance. One night he said, "I'm glad you and Patricia have found balance." I just smiled faintly. Balance, yes. Something like that. Because now, I had a plan. And plans required silence, not shouting. I began documenting everything, dates, receipts, copies of mail. I called a lawyer friend from my office, discreetly. "Can a co-owner be removed if the signature was added under duress or deception?" I asked. She hesitated. "That's tricky, Laura. But if you can show financial or emotional manipulation, yes, possibly." I exhaled slowly. "Then I'll find it." And I did. One afternoon, while Patricia was out volunteering, I went through the home office. She had taken over that space too, labeled folders, neatly stacked binders, everything in order. Almost too perfect. In the bottom drawer, beneath a ledger, I found a manila envelope marked refinance drafts. Inside were early versions of the ownership documents. And on one, Mark's signature was clearly photocopied, not original. The next page had hers, in blue ink. Real. Confident. She'd handled the paperwork herself. She hadn't helped. She had orchestrated. That evening, I waited. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I sat through dinner as she served roasted chicken, as Ruth called to compliment her, as Mark smiled absently. I smiled too, the kind of smile that hides a knife behind it. After the dishes were cleared, I quietly went upstairs and called my lawyer friend again. I found evidence, I said. A falsified signature. Photocopy, she asked. You're sure? Positive. Then you have grounds to challenge the title. Get a notary to confirm handwriting discrepancies. And, Laura, be careful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard Patricia's footsteps in the hallway, soft and steady. She stopped outside my door, lingered a moment, then moved on. The next morning, her tone at breakfast was syrupy. I had the strangest dream, she said, buttering toast. That you were packing boxes. Maybe it was a nightmare, I said without looking up. Maybe, she murmured. But I saw the calculation in her eyes. She knew something was shifting. She just didn't know what. Over the next week, I played the role perfectly, quiet, polite, predictable. While she cooked, I filed documents. While she entertained Ruth, I visited the notary. I kept my movements soft and invisible, the way women are taught to survive. Then, one afternoon, I invited a real estate agent to the house under the pretense of an appraisal. Patricia greeted him at the door, cheerful as always. Can I help you? He glanced at his clipboard. Appointment for a Mrs. Laura Lewis. I stepped forward. That's me. Her smile stiffened. An appraisal? For what? For our home, I said. Routine evaluation. I watched the color drain from her face. She tried to play it off. You should have told me. I would have made cookies. But her eyes darted nervously to Mark's office door. I smiled. That's all right. This is just business. When Mark came home that night, Patricia wasted no time. She had an agent here today, she told him, voice trembling just enough to sound innocent. Mark turned to me. Is that true? Yes. Why? Because I wanted to know what my home is worth, I said evenly. Our home. Our home, Patricia corrected softly, as if it were a reflex. Mark looked between us, uneasy. What's going on here? Maybe you should ask your co-owner, I said, my tone calm, deliberate. He frowned, turning to her. What's she talking about? Patricia's face went pale. She's twisting things. I set the photocopied signature on the table. Am I? Silence. Mark picked it up, his brow furrowing. This isn't. He stopped. Looked again. The ink, the print quality. Patricia, where did you get this? She stammered. You asked me to help with. I didn't sign this, he said slowly. I folded my arms. No. You didn't. The confrontation that followed was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No shouting, no slamming doors. Just the slow unraveling of someone who'd built a life out of pretending to help. Mark's voice broke the silence. You forged my signature. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. It was to protect you. The bank wouldn't approve without a second name, I thought. You thought you could own my house, I said softly. Her tears fell, but her expression was still one of control. You don't understand how fragile you both were. You needed me. No, I said, standing. You needed to belong. And you mistook my kindness for vacancy. That night, Patricia packed her things. She tried to speak with me at the doorway. I didn't mean to hurt you, Laura. I looked at her, really looked, the carefully pressed blouse, the trembling lip, the exhaustion under the perfection. For the first time, I felt a twinge of pity. I believe that, I said. But you did. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Ruth won't forgive you for this. I can live with that. She paused, then whispered, you won't be happy without me. I smiled faintly. Maybe not. But at least I'll be home. She left before dawn. No note. No goodbye. Only her perfume remained for a few days, fading like a ghost. Ruth called the next morning. Her tone was icy. I hope you're proud. Patricia was in tears. She'll be fine, I said. She always lands on her feet. You've humiliated her. And Mark. I protected what was mine. Ruth scoffed. You've always been territorial. Just finally learned it's okay to defend my territory, I said quietly. You taught me that. She hung up without another word. Mark spent the next few days silent, withdrawn. He didn't apologize, not in words. But he fixed the broken dining chair she'd insisted on replacing. He moved the table back to its old position. One evening, he brought home my favorite mug, carefully glued together again. I thought maybe you'd want this back, he said. I took it gently. The crack was still visible, faint but permanent. Thank you, I said. We sat together at the table, just the two of us, for the first time in months. The house felt still again. The quiet was mine this time, not hers. The notary report came 2 weeks later, confirming the forgery. Patricia had no legal claim to the house. I filed the correction paperwork, and by mid-month, the title was restored, my name and Mark's only. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Kindness had cost me peace, suspicion had cost me sleep. All I wanted now was balance. So I cleaned the house top to bottom, not to erase her, but to reclaim the rhythm of my life. I cooked slowly, hummed softly, set the table for two. When Ruth visited again months later, she barely looked me in the eye. She sat stiffly, sipping tea. I still think you overreacted, she muttered. Maybe, I said. But the house feels lighter now. She looked around. It does smell like you again. It was the closest thing to approval I'd ever get from her. That night, as I turned off the kitchen light, I paused at the table, that old oak table, back in its rightful place. For months it had felt like a battlefield. Now it was just wood again. Familiar. Warm. I ran my hand over its surface, tracing the faint scratches from years of dinners and laughter. I realized then that homes aren't lost all at once. They disappear in moments when you let someone else make the coffee, choose the chairs, speak in your place. And they're reclaimed the same way, moment by moment, choice by choice. When Mark came in, he slipped an arm around me. You okay? I nodded. Just thinking. About what? How easy it is to lose yourself in your own home. He squeezed my shoulder. You didn't lose yourself, Laura. You fought. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just stopped giving away my seat at the table. He didn't understand the layers of that line, but he kissed my temple anyway. And as I stood there in the quiet hum of my kitchen, I realized something. Kindness isn't about letting everyone in. It's about knowing when to close the door. The day the truth became public started quietly, like any other morning. The sky was overcast, the smell of rain in the air. I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I saw Ruth's silhouette, sharp shoulders, perfect posture. And beside her, Patricia. My heart sank. Mark wasn't home. I opened the door slowly. Ruth. Patricia. Ruth's expression was grim. We need to talk. I stepped aside, though every part of me wanted to keep the door shut. They sat on the sofa, close together like a pair of prosecutors. Patricia looked pale, almost fragile, but there was defiance in her eyes. Ruth spoke first. Patricia tells me you accused her of forgery. I didn't accuse, I said evenly. I proved it. Ruth's lips tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Patricia made a mistake trying to help. You should have come to me. I laughed softly. Help. She falsified signatures and added herself to my deed. That's not help. That's theft. Patricia's voice trembled. I did it for Mark. The bank. You did it for yourself, I interrupted. Ruth stood abruptly. Laura, you've turned into someone I barely recognize. Vindictive. Suspicious. You used to be kind. I met her gaze calmly. I used to be quiet. That's not the same thing. The conversation didn't last much longer. Patricia's tears came, soft and practiced. Ruth left angry, muttering something about family loyalty. But within a week, word had spread because things like that always do. At the salon, at church, even at the grocery store, people whispered. Some pitied Patricia, others quietly applauded me. In a town like ours, secrets don't stay hidden, they just trade hands. It wasn't revenge I felt, it was relief. For the first time, I didn't have to defend myself. The truth had its own way of walking out the front door. A month later, Ruth called again. Her tone was smaller this time. I suppose I owe you an apology, she said reluctantly. She told me she'd spoken to the bank on your behalf. I didn't realize. It's done now, I said softly. We're moving forward. She hesitated. Patricia's gone to stay with her sister upstate. She's not well. For a moment, I pictured her sitting on a strange bed, surrounded by borrowed things again. I didn't wish her harm. I just hoped she finally understood what it felt like to live somewhere that wasn't yours. Mark and I took slow steps back toward each other. It wasn't simple. Trust never rebuilds the way it was before, it grows in uneven lines, like a scar. We went to counseling. We talked about boundaries, about listening, about how silence had almost destroyed us. One evening, as we walked through the garden, he stopped by the roses. You were right, he said quietly. About everything. I looked at him. What made you finally see it? He smiled faintly. The day after she left, I came home and the house felt empty. But not bad empty. Peaceful. Like it could breathe again. That made me smile too. Homes breathe, I said. If you listen. A few weeks later, Ruth invited us to dinner, just us. No third chair this time. When we arrived, she'd set the table with her best china. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, the same meal Patricia used to cook. Ruth looked uncomfortable as we sat today. I thought we could start over, she said, voice careful. Family should. I nodded. That's what I've been trying to do. Dinner was quiet at first, then gradually softened. Ruth asked about work, about the garden. She even complimented the cobbler I'd brought. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a truce. As we were leaving, Ruth touched my arm. You were right to stand your ground, she said softly. I just didn't want to lose her too. You didn't, I said. You just didn't see who she'd become. That night, back home, I set 3 plates on the counter by habit, then paused. For months, that third plate had been Patricia's. I put it back in the cabinet and smiled to myself. Some absences are blessings disguised as routines you finally get to break. The next morning, I opened all the windows. The house filled with sunlight and fresh air, no trace of her perfume, no hum of her footsteps. Just quiet. I brewed coffee the way I liked it, too strong, a little bitter. When Mark joined me, we sat across from each other at the table. The same table that had once divided us now felt like an anchor. Sometimes, I still catch myself thinking of Patricia not with anger, but curiosity. I wonder if she tells her version of the story somewhere, about how she meant well, about how she was misunderstood. Maybe she believes that. Maybe she even believes she saved us. But I've learned that people who need to control others often call it help. The months passed quietly. I repainted the dining room, a pale sage green. I planted new flowers where her plaque had been, let the garden grow wild in places. Imperfect, but mine. When Ruth came over one afternoon, she noticed the mess. You've let the vines take over. I smiled. They'll find their way. She looked around and sighed. You've made it feel like home again. I didn't say it, but I thought it always was. By the end of summer, the scars had faded to lessons. Mark still carried guilt, Ruth still flinched at the mention of Patricia's name. But as for me, I'd found something steadier than anger. Boundaries. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't losing control, it's realizing you can take it back without losing yourself. One evening, I set the table for dinner, 2 plates again, candles flickering. As Mark poured the wine, he asked, "Do you ever think about her?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly when I smell roses." He nodded. "Do you hate her?" I thought for a long moment. "No. I don't hate her. She taught me something important." "What's that?" I looked at him, smiled faintly. "That kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's surrender." And then, for the first time in months, we laughed real laughter, the kind that shakes the dust off a house. It echoed off the walls and through the rooms, filling every corner she'd once occupied. And I realized that's what healing sounds like, not silence, but laughter in a space that finally belongs to you again. By autumn, the air had changed, softer, cooler, smelling faintly of leaves and wood smoke. I'd started walking every evening after dinner, the same loop through our neighborhood where the maples arched over the sidewalks like cathedral ceilings. Sometimes Mark joined me. Sometimes I went alone. It became a ritual of sorts, one quiet mile to remind myself that stillness wasn't emptiness. It was peace. One evening, I passed a yard sale 2 blocks down. The usual collection of forgotten lives, cracked teapots, mismatched picture frames, paperback novels with folded spines. And then I saw it. A small, ceramic plaque. "Home is where the heart is." I froze. It looked identical to the one Patricia had buried beneath my hydrangeas months before. The same chipped corner, the same faint hairline crack across the word heart. For a moment, I considered buying it, reclaiming the symbol she'd tried to plant in my soil. But then I smiled, turned, and kept walking. I didn't need it. My home already knew where its heart was. Back at the house, I found Mark on the porch, tightening a loose board. When he saw me, he grinned. "You've been out longer lately." "I like the quiet," I said. "It reminds me I'm not afraid of being alone." He nodded, hammer pausing midair. "You know, when Patricia first moved in, I thought you were overreacting." "I really did. I thought you were being territorial." "I was," I said gently. "And I had every right to be." He smiled faintly. "You were right all along. I just didn't see it." "I know." We sat in silence for a while. The porch light flickered softly, the sound of crickets filling the gaps between our words. It felt good, ordinary again. In the weeks that followed, life unfolded slowly, the way it used to before chaos took root. Saturday mornings meant coffee and newspapers. Sunday afternoons meant folding laundry with the windows open. The hum of daily life, the sound of spoons, running water, footsteps on the stairs, felt like music again. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the attic, I found an old photo album. Dust-covered, forgotten. Inside were the early years of our marriage, road trips, Christmas mornings, birthdays where the cake always leaned slightly to one side. But what caught my breath was a photo of the dining room table, our old one, before Patricia's redecorating. It was scratched, uneven, surrounded by laughter. I ran my thumb across the glossy surface. You can tell a lot about a home from its table, where the conversations happen, the arguments, the forgiveness. And I realized that everything that had broken us had started there, at that table. And everything that healed us had, too. A month later, I got a call from Ruth. She sounded tired, smaller somehow. "Laura, would you come by for tea?" When I arrived, the house looked dimmer than I remembered. Her once immaculate shelves were a little dusty, her favorite armchair slightly frayed. Age had softened her in ways pride couldn't protect. She poured tea carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been thinking," she said. "About everything. About Patricia. About you." I waited. She came to me once, years ago, after her husband died. Said she didn't know how to start over. "I thought bringing her into your home would save her. I didn't realize it would swallow you." Her eyes met mine. "I'm sorry, Laura, for not believing you sooner." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Ruth's apologies were rare, like finding warmth in marble. I reached over, touched her hand. We all see what we want to see. I wanted to believe she was harmless too. She nodded slowly. Do you ever wonder if women like her know what they're doing? I thought for a long time. I think some do. But I think others just can't live without a role to play. And if one isn't given to them, they make one. Ruth smiled faintly. You sound like you've made peace with it. I have, I said softly. Because I stopped waiting for her to apologize. That evening, back home, I found Mark in the garden, trimming the last of the summer blooms. I told him about Ruth's apology. He smiled. She finally said it. She did. He nodded. Good. It's about time. I sat on the porch step, watching him cut away the dead stems. The smell of earth filled the air. You know what's funny? I said. It took losing the house, almost losing it, to realize I'd stopped tending to it. I'd let other people decide what belonged inside. Mark looked up. We both did. Yeah, I said. But now I know. A home isn't the walls, or the deed, or who signs the papers. It's who protects its peace. He stood, brushed the dirt from his hands, and smiled. Then I'd say we've got it back. That night, I lit a candle in the dining room, the same room that had once felt like a stage for someone else's performance. I placed the candle in the center of the table and sat quietly, listening to the small crackle of the flame. On the wall hung a framed quote I'd written out myself. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It reminded me not to apologize for the word no. To understand that generosity without discernment becomes surrender. And to remember that every home, every life, needs a locked door or two. A few months later, the seasons turned again. Snow dusted the windowsills, the house creaked with the old familiar rhythm of winter. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine again. Ruth came for Christmas, bringing her famous fruitcake no one ever finished. She was quieter, gentler. Mark carved the roast while I set the plates. There was no third chair this time, just the two of us and his mother. After dinner, Ruth reached for my hand. Thank you, she said softly, for giving us all another chance. I smiled. You gave me one too. She nodded, her eyes glassy. You remind me of your mother, she whispered. Stubborn, but kind. It was the nicest thing she'd ever said to me. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stepped outside. The sky was clear, the stars like pinpricks in a velvet blanket. I stood there, barefoot on the cold porch wood, feeling the night breathe around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at home, not in a house, but in myself. I realized then that every woman I'd ever known, my mother, Ruth, even Patricia, had lived by some version of the same unspoken rule. Be accommodating, be useful, be good. But sometimes being good means drawing a line. Sometimes it means saying, not this. Not here. When I went back inside, Mark was asleep on the couch, a blanket half slid to the floor. The candle had burned low, its wick glowing faintly in the dark. I blew it out, the smoke curling upward like a whispered promise. Then I whispered it aloud, to no one in particular. This is my home. And I'm not giving up my seat ever again. Sometimes the people who smile the widest are the ones who inch closest to taking what's yours. They don't storm the door, they slip through kindness, through favors, through the quiet spaces you leave open when you're too tired to guard them. But the truth is, peace isn't free. It has to be protected, tenderly, fiercely, unapologetically. So if you ever find someone rearranging your table, your heart, or your sense of self, don't wait until the papers are signed to take it back. Because a home isn't what you build. It's what you defend. Would you have let her stay? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe every woman deserves to reclaim her peace. Subscribe for more stories like mine.